Hello, I'm Barry Shaw, and this is The View from Israel. Country after country, in the vacuum of what I call lost souls, are losing controls of their towns and cities. New York, anybody? By electing what I call the enemy to lead their towns and parliaments in a dumbness that I found mystifying and alarming. And there are those, including myself, that believe that Israel is at the forefront of a battle of the soul for the very existence of Western civilization. A battle that's been imposed on us by an enemy with an alien agenda, determined to convert the West to their image, and are doing it town by town, city by city, country by country in the West. Those of you that have followed me have seen and read my report on the collapse of Western countries by failed leaderships adopting perverted ideas and values from Australia to Britain, France, and into America. And the latest example, of course, is New York. Let's collectively watch the collapse of New York after their recent election. Now, today I'm examining what the hell is happening in Sweden. I visited Sweden. It seems like a placid, pleasant place. But even when I visited over a decade ago, I detected tectonic shifts taking place that I predicted would bode badly for Swedes and Sweden. And what has happened since has sadly proved me to be right. Now, to help me understand what's happening in Sweden, I've invited a well-known personality in Sweden, ARON FLAM, to answer some of the burning thoughts and questions that I have of Sweden. ARON, welcome to The View from Israel.
Thank you so much, Barry. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Thanks. So you're a well-known figure in Swedish culture, shrewd observer of the Swedish scene, a writer, political observer. And I want you to help me to understand Sweden, because I hold a view that is troubling to me and should be troubling to all Swedes. Now, I've read a few of your statements and articles and watched you as much as I can on YouTube, although it's in Swedish, on issues that have been highlighted there. And it seems they've not gone well, some of them, with some of your authorities. As a Swede, as a European, as a human being, Muslims to the left constitute, you write, a fifth column that I cannot let stand. What did you mean by that statement?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say that what you call dumbness or stupidity, we call naivete. It's a less offensive word that is used by Swedish politicians all the time, since everything seems to be going to hell, as you describe it. Well, what I said by that is, you have to understand, in order to really comprehend what's going on in Sweden, Sweden has been neutral up until recently for 250 years. No wars, nothing. So we are damaged by peace. We suffer from not PTS, well, peace TDS syndrome, sort of. What's happened is, we've had a cultural hegemony by social democracy for 100 years, and we stayed out of the First World War, and we were not participating in the Second World War. So social democracy has probably gone further here than it has in any other country on earth, which means we have done away with meritocracy. We have adopted all the ideas of the postmodern left. And what I meant by that quote is that the leftists of Sweden and the Islamists, in particularly the Muslim Brotherhood, made an alliance. And I think we were first in the West to make that alliance. Our Prime Minister, Olof Palme, he used to be a famous guy around the world back when he was alive. He was killed by an assassin in the late 80s. He was the first Western prime prime minister, who in his official capacity as prime minister met with Yasser Arafat. And at the time, Yasser Arafat was still considered a terrorist by most of the West. And he met him in Algiers in 1974, just a few days or maybe even one day before Arafat's famous olive branch, pistol on the hip speech at the UN, and thus opened the door for Islamists to the West. So what I meant was that we are infiltrated and ruled by, to a certain extent, even though we have a right-wing government at the moment. This is election year, so that might change by fall of 26. But they have formed an alliance and taken in a lot of Muslim immigrants. Sweden has gone from a country that was one of the most culturally and ethnically homogeneous countries in the world to being maybe top 6 multicultural countries in the West. So, and when I said that was right after October 7th, 2023, and I have been at this for over a decade, warning my countrymen of the danger of Islam and socialism. So for me, October 7, 2023 was sort of, do you call it in English clarion call? Or a call to arms, taking it hopefully from words alone to the streets. Unfortunately, my countrymen hasn't really joined me in this struggle, so I'm fighting almost alone. There are a few voices here, but they are very few and far between.
Let me add some other statements of yours, Aron. As a Swede, as a European, as a human being, Muslims and the left constitute a fifth column that I cannot let stand. The other statements are all funding for Islamism must be cut off completely, not partially, completely. And thirdly, every institution, organization, foundation, political party or company that has been infiltrated and controlled by the left must be liberated. If they cannot be liberated, they must be closed down. In every context where the left and the Islamists take place, we must take more place. Some people might call this anti-democratic, but explain what you meant by this.
This is not anti-democratic. I would suggest the opposite, actually, that this is a quest for democracy. What has happened in Sweden is that the left, because of the Social Democrats' long cultural and political hegemony, have taken over every institution, our state broadcaster. They are entrenched everywhere in academia, journalism, you name it. And these institutions needs to be taken back or defunded because they are using our tax money against our will for nefarious purposes.
Yeah, you also wrote that Swedes pay the most money per capita in the entire world to the Palestinians, and most of UNRWA, whose schools have been educating generations of children into terrorism. I tend to agree with that, but can you elucidate on that?
Well, for various historical reasons, Sweden, as I said, because of Olof Palme, has been a very ardent supporter of the Palestinian question, if that's the correct term. You see, Sweden during the Second World War, there's an old Norwegian joke that Hitler took Denmark in 2 days, Norway in 2 months, and Sweden with a phone call. Because Sweden was supposedly neutral, although we supplied the Axis powers with Hitler Germany with ball bearings and iron ore for their war machine. So we were basically on the Nazi side, but non-belligerent from 1933, when Hitler came to power, till late November 1944, just before the war ended. So this has deep historical roots. And And when Germany lost the war, instead of dealing with this history, as Germany was forced to do, they were forced into what they call a Vergangenheitsbewältigung. Sweden, in the socialist tradition, just swept these problems of anti-Semitism under the carpet and proclaimed themselves pro-Allied, because they had been blocked from trade with some of the Allied powers and couldn't invest in America, and some of their assets were frozen. This was the Wallenberg family, and so for maybe a decade in the 50s, they were staunchly, or at least staunchly for Sweden, pro-Israel, and then it started to shift in the 60s. With the rise of a new left, the 68s, as we call them, flower power generation, and they instead took up again the cooperation between, well, if they were a non-belligerent ally of Hitler, the Arabs, or at least the Palestinian cause, was also an ally of Adolf Hitler, and they reconnected, and through various political deals, they decided to take in Muslims to Sweden at a very high rate, and they also decided to teach these Muslims about the Swedish political systems, and then when we joined the EU, how the EU worked and how you could subsidize various organizations within the EU. So Sweden has been sort of a garrison town for Islamists, where they can safely organize and plan a takeover of Western civilization.
Yeah, well, I can agree with you 100% with what you say about UNRWA, because I've been involved in this for more than 2 years, and Israel has produced overwhelming evidence of their collusion in supporting Hamas, encouraging Hamas, knowing exactly what Hamas has been doing, because their centers have been used by Hamas as headquarters, and even some of the headquarters have been used as entrances into their terror tunnels. It's not just me writing this. My producer, Loris Berger, there in Stockholm, regularly puts out videos by a friend of mine, David Bedin, from the Center of Near East Policies, who gives overwhelming evidence of the indoctrination that has been paid for by UNIFIL in the school books of the Palestinian children, inciting them to hate Jews and to violence in their school books. As I said, funded by UNIFIL, funded by UNRWA in the school books, in UNRWA schools and education facilities, which is basically indoctrination centers. And this has been highlighted more recently by another friend of mine, Hadassah Hausdorff from UK Laws for Israel, who has accompanied Hillel Noor from UN Watch, who went to the United Nations to give them directly the evidence, it's not the first time, of the collusion of United Nations organization in actual, not only the promotion and indoctrination of the Palestinians, not only in Gaza, but even that area that's under the Palestinian Authority, but also actively have paid UNRWA employees involved in the barbaric, genocidal 7th of October massacre of Jews and hostage taking. And there are videos of the individuals, and they have been named. And yet the United Nations do not take any retributional step against and banning their own organizations. On that score, I really don't know what to do beyond what has been done up till now. But you're right to highlight it in Sweden, because as you rightly say, Sweden has been one of the major European donors, so both directly to the Palestinian Authority that have their pay-to-slay policy, but also to UNRWA as well. Anything you'd like to add on that?
Yes, I'm well aware of David Bedin's work. I find Natasha Hausdorff a wonderful advocate for righteousness, as well as Hillel Neuer, of course. But I also want to add that these problems have been known way before October 7th, 2023. I have been trying to inform my compatriots in Sweden about the work of UNRWA for at least 10 years now. And I have found articles in Swedish dailies and evening papers from 1967, where you can see pictures of Palestinian school children in the yard outside of an UNRWA school doing Hitler salutes. So these problems have been known since at least 1967.
Yeah, I have to add, by the way, that I speak to you as one of the co-founders of the Netanya Terror Victims Organization. I'm speaking to you from Netanya. So, you know, when they're talking about from the river to the sea, our response here in Netanya, which is on the sea, is basically, I wish it was from the river to the sea, because if I were to turn my camera around, I could show you out of my window here in Netanya, 5-minute walk to the beach, the town of Tulkarem, which is only a 20-minute car ride. But if I point directly out of the window behind, ahead of me over here, I could show you Tulkarem, which, as I said, 20-minute car ride. You know, so it's basically from the Israeli 6th highway to the sea, which is about 8 miles. So this is something you could use sometime in the future. Moving on, just to prove to my audience in Sweden or anywhere else that you're not simply a radical right-wing lunatic or whatever, you wrote a book. You wrote a book about the far-right history of Sweden and its dalliance with the Nazis, a book related to the Swedish tiger, showing a comic-looking tiger with a swastika on its leg. And actually, this book got you into trouble in Sweden. Tell us about it.
Well, the book is a 600-page sort of a white book dealing with the crimes of our Social Democratic Party, from their cooperation with Hitler through history and their cooperation with Yasser Arafat and the KGB, up until now, when we have imported the Muslim Brotherhood and various other Islamists into Sweden. And when the first 2 editions were selling better than hotcakes, I suppose is the English term. And when I printed the 3rd edition and was about to release that, Swedish police stormed the premises of my publishing company and confiscated the entire 3rd edition, which was 1.5 tons of books. And then I was prosecuted for 2 years until I was freed. And they prosecuted me for, within quotation marks, copyright infringement, because of the cover of the book, where I had taken a famous wartime symbol of the Swedish tiger. As you probably understand, we don't have tigers in Sweden. Tigers is not a part of the Swedish fauna. But that symbol was a symbol from the Second World War, used for propaganda purposes by the Swedish authorities, quite similar to the British saying, "loose lips sink ships," which was a sort of a propaganda effort towards the British public not to talk too loosely about the wartime efforts, because there might be Nazi spies. But Sweden wasn't in the war, so a Swedish tiger has a double entendre. The word tiger in Swedish means both the animal tiger, and it's sort of means shut up as well. So a Swedish tiger means both that a Swede has to be like a tiger and that he needs to be very, very silent. And since Sweden wasn't a part of the Allied effort, you might wonder what they were supposed to be silent about. And this was, of course, the cooperation with the Nazis, letting Nazi trains with soldiers go through Sweden to Norway, which they occupied, in their effort to, among other things, take Narvik so that Churchill couldn't cut off the production of iron ore and ball bearings to Germany. And ball bearings are important because in peacetime, ball bearings is something we use for bicycles or any type of machinery in factories. But in wartime, they are used for U-boats, tanks, submachine guns, airplanes, stuff like that. So ball bearings were essential to the German war effort. And had Sweden just stopped exporting ball bearings to Germany, as they promised the Allies to do, then the German war effort, or at least the war could have been shortened by up to a year and a half, possibly, and saving a lot of lives in the process. But the Swedes instead continued their export of ball bearings until, as I said, late November 1944. And then I also wrote in the book, so the first part of the book is about Olof Palme and his meeting with Arafat. The second part is about the Swedish national character, their soul, if you will. And the third part is about the cooperation with the Nazis. And I'm betting I was probably prosecuted for the third part, because that is still a very contentious area in Swedish public life.
Well, you know, some years ago, I wrote a book called Fighting Hamas, BDS and Anti-Semitism. Now, I didn't write this book after the 7th of October. I wrote about it, was published in 2015. Why I mention this, because in this book, even then, I dedicated a chapter which was called the Malmo symptom. And what I was referring to here, it was an extension of what I call the Stockholm Syndrome. And you may know it, Aaron, but for our viewers that don't, there was once a infamous bank attack by some armed criminals who attacked a bank in Sweden, held the customers and the workers there hostage in order to get the money. In the meantime, the Swedish police arrived and there was a siege situation, which went on for some time. And this ended up with actually a number of the customers who were identifying more with the armed criminals in the bank than they were with regard to the police outside. And I applied this phenomenon to Malmo, where local Muslim migrants were at that time threatening local Swedish Jews who opposed their support for Palestinian terrorists. I'm not talking about the last 2 years. I'm going back nearly 20 years now. But the socialist mayor then, Ilmar Reepalu, his name is, rather than condemn the violent and threatening Muslims, a growing population in that town, demanded that his Jews condemn Israel as he opposed their rights to hold a rally, these Jews in the town square, in support of Israel, because he said that would send the wrong message. Now, your mayor at that time was a social democrat, as was a Malmo city councilman called Adrian Kaba, who posted on his Facebook page, this is going back into July 2014, that ISIS was being trained by the Israeli Mossad, and that the Muslims are not waging war, they're being used as pawns by other people, meaning the Jews. This was going on at the time that the Malmo synagogue was being vandalized by these Muslims, and the Rabbi Kesselman, was physically attacked when he was walking home from the synagogue. And yet you had your non-Muslim social democrat politicians there, including the mayor and others, condemning the Jews, the local Jews, for being for wanting to demonstrate about the persecution that was being imposed in Malmo against them.
Yes, Ramalmö, as I call it, the Ramallah of the North, because Malmö is probably one of the most multicultural cities in Sweden, meaning that it has a very large Muslim Arab population. And that has grown since you wrote about that. It has grown immensely. And Malmö used to be a city with a, in Swedish terms, rather large Jewish population of maybe 3,000 to 5,000 members in the Jewish congregation there. Today, there's only 300 to 500 Jews left in Malmo, and they are leaving. The population is dwindling as the Muslim population is growing. And Malmo still has a socialist mayor, and she is very much on the side of the Muslims. So the situation hasn't changed. Well, it has changed, but only for the worse.
Today, there are estimated, I would think, according to the statistics that I found, about 80,000 Muslims in Malmo, and there are probably about 500 Jews. So guess which population groups the cynical politicians will give preference to appeal to their vote?
Well, I don't have to guess. I know they will appeal to the Muslims, but also you have to understand that the new socialist mayor of Malmö, Katrin Stjernfeldt-Jammeh, she is married to a Muslim, so she has personal reasons to affiliate with Islam as well.
Do you have a situation there in Sweden, as you have in Britain, for instance, that gradually a lot of the towns and the cities, by virtue of rising population, are actually voting for mayors in their towns and in their cities as well? Has this phenomenon reached Stockholm?
Oh, absolutely. Well,
Stockholm, Sweden, sorry.
It has. We have one member of parliament who used to be a part of the Social Democratic Party called Jamal El-Hajj, and he was. It was discovered that he had ties to Hamas.
Yep.
And had helped fundraise for Hamas, and so. There was an effort by me and several other Swedish voices to get the Social Democrats to shun him from the Social Democratic Party, which was successful in a way. He is now still in parliament, but as a political wild man, as we say here in Sweden, which means he is not party affiliated officially. But he is still voting with the left on every question, and it really took more than half a year or something to get the Social Democrats to admit that he was affiliated with Hamas. And it culminated in a discussion in Parliament between the leader of the Moderate Party and the leader of the Social Democratic Party, Magdalena Andersson, where she, in a Freudian slip, accidentally called him Jamal Hamas. So she was defending him, screaming, fake crying, that how can you accuse Jamal Hamas of being affiliated with Hamas, which sort of illustrated the problem quite clearly, I would say.
Aron, she was only telling the truth.
Ourselves of being tolerant of everybody except Israelis and Israel. So this is the country of Greta Thunberg. Do not forget. So we have a long history of Palestinianism in Sweden, and Palestinianism is quite entrenched here. That is why we are the country in the world that gives more to UNRWA and the Palestinian cause per capita than any other country anywhere, including Saudi Arabia and Iran or what have you. We were also the first Western country to recognize Palestine, or at least the first EU country to do so. I think Iceland beat us to it. They acknowledged Palestine in 2011, and we recognized Palestine in 2014. That was our foreign minister, Margot Wallström, and that was her the first thing she did when she came into office in 2014.
Yeah, well, two answers to that. First of all, we now intimately know Greta Thunberg. She is of the sinking Titanic flotilla that we had over here. We managed to save her from the waves of Gaza and sent her home. But
twice.
Twice. Yeah, I'm sure she'll be back a third time. You know, she's well funded. It gives her fame or notoriety, whatever you call it. But, you know, moving on to another thing, while we're on the subject of Malmo, by the way, you can help me to understand a conundrum that relates to Malmo and the Eurovision Song Contest that was held there with the which became for the Israeli delegate not a very welcoming place, Malmo. In fact, it was a hellhole of hate that they describe it of their experience in Malmo. But there was a strange phenomenon that went on there. That in Malmo, at the Eurovision Song Contest, that the official Swedish jury, the panel, gave Israel 0 points, while the Swedish public gave the singer, the female singer, a maximum 12 points. There seems to be a change between the culturally elite, if you want to call it that, in Sweden and the public. Can you explain that dichotomy? Because the Israelis were pleased about it. We think, oh, maybe the Swedes are on our side after all. Explain it to us.
Well, at least people who watch and vote in the Eurovision Song Contests are, I don't know if they're pro-Israeli, but I would like to interpret it as a sign of a silent majority of Eurovision Song Contests voters and watchers in Sweden who are fed up with the Palestinianism that is being stuck down their throats by the Swedish elite in culture, media, academia, politics. That's at least how I want to see it, because I know there are good-hearted, righteous Swedes who believe in Western civilization. And this, I think, was their sort of silent way of giving the middle finger to to what they have been subjected to. You have to understand that when October 7th happened in Sweden, the Swedish media kicked into high gear for Palestine almost immediately. Within 4 days, they had regained their senses from the shock of seeing what Hamas did to the Israelis, and they started propagating for the Palestinian cause. And I think a lot of Swedes who saw that recognized that what Hamas and other terrorist groups, as well as civilian Palestinians from Gaza, what they did was horrendous, barbaric, and contra to all we hold dear here in the West. But they have no means of expressing themselves. These Swedes that voted for Israel, they are very far from the levers of power in Sweden, in government agencies, in academia, in journalism. So this was probably the only way that they could express their support for Israel.
So is it true then that your media for the last 2 years have been spreading the lies that have been spread by a lot of the Western media in the, for instance, I've been particularly involved with regard to Sky News UK. Recently, the BBC has been condemned for false reporting by simply putting out the facts and figures that the biased media absolutely ignore. There's a phenomena that I give any viewers or anybody when you're listening to reports, although the war has now ended. But for the last 2 years, I specifically told people who are watching whatever TV channel you have, watch one word that they never use when it comes to the war between Israel and Hamas in Gaza. And you know what the missing word is? Hamas. They never refer. Even the BBC and Sky News UK, I don't know what happens in Sweden if you look back, but if you listen carefully to the reporting, they never use the word Hamas. They always talk about Gazans or Palestinians or innocents and whatever, but it's always the attack on Israel, Israel, Israel with the false reporting. For instance, the lies that we put out, and I was intimately involved in this when a friend of mine, Mark Regev, who was an Israeli spokesman, was in the Sky News studio, walked in there, didn't know about what was happening, but Anna Botting, the studio head, the speaking head there, accused him and Israel of bombing a hospital in Gaza, killing 500 people, because she wasn't quoting Hamas, she was quoting the Palestinian Ministry of Health in Gaza. And when my friend Mark Greger, who was stunned by this, asked her, perhaps you should wait until you've got the evidence coming in as who perpetrated it, if it actually happened. Anna Botting completed that interview with her with 2 words no journalist should ever use: not interested. I got the UK Lawyers for Israel on that to either get an apology from Sky News or get Anna Botting fired. Neither of those things happened. But you tell me, if you could think back about your media, your national media, if they adopted the same horrendous bias using false narratives of genocide and starvation, where I was pumping out the facts daily given by Kogat of what the aid was going through that was being denied by the media. Was this also being copy-pasted like BBC, Sky News UK in Sweden as well?
Absolutely. You have to understand about Sweden that Sweden is what we call a consensus society. We don't have the same spread of media that Western nations like France or Germany or the United States, which has a much more free media market, or England even. So if the BBC has put out 2 corrections a week, which I've read somewhere about their reporting, I haven't seen any corrections in our state media, and our state media is huge. They are funded forcibly by the taxpayers at a tune of 10 billion Swedish crowns per year. They employ 4,000 people and they skew the entire market. Let me try and explain how bad it is here. Swedish State Radio, which is the biggest radio station in Sweden and the only radio station that puts out news, they have actually, during this war, employed an Hamas operative as a journalist. Employed, not just quoted, employed. This got out. I was one of the voices that put it out there that she's obviously Hamas, and she was fired. But the boss who hired her, he's still there at Swedish State Radio. Now, Swedish State Radio has also employed Sami Abu Salem. They call him on their own webpage still our man in Gaza. What you have to know about Sami Abu Salem is that he's also employed since 20 years by Wafa, which is the propaganda arm of the Palestinian Authority, which is right beneath Mahmoud Abbas, President Mahmoud Abbas. So I would say that Sweden is way worse than the BBC. At least in England, you have magazines of a more conservative or right-wing bent that expose these lies and manage to get some accountability, but we have gotten no accountability from our state public broadcaster.
The last thing I want to ask you with regard to your media over there, I'm sure, based on what you're telling me, that they put out the lies about starvation and mass killings and genocide going on. However, as I say, I've been pumping out the actual figures of casualties in Gaza, even the latest Hamas figures from August, for instance. I also applied 2 independent witnesses who have been in Gaza. For instance, one, Colonel Richard Kemp, who is a commander of British forces, who says not only has there been no mass genocide going on in Gaza, but as somebody who knows urban warfare in Europe, that the IDF has conducted a more sterile operation than even the British forces ever had. And the statistics, the true statistics, show that there has been less than 1 civilian death to every 1 official combatant. And this is confirmed also by John Spencer from West Point, who has also been several times in Gaza and commits the same. So the truth and the figures are on our side, and the lies that have been perpetrated by your media seem to go uncorrected. Tell me, has it ever been discussed on documentaries or in your media or news programs about the actual figures, combatants to to civilians that have been killed, the accurate figures in Gaza? Or is that lie still out there? And all Swedes are actually convinced, if they believe your media, that we've been perpetrating war crimes there.
Well, the Swedish media market is completely skewed by the enormity of our public service, which means that almost all daily newspapers and even evening newspapers need subsidies to survive, which makes them dependent on the state. So there's only been alternative voices like my own that have sort of pointed out that the figures don't add up. And I would argue that you don't need to be a colonel or an expert in urban warfare from West Point to see that the genocide claim is a complete lie, because Gaza is a small area and it's the most densely populated area in the world. Israel has dropped over 200,000 bombs on Gaza, and still there's only 67,000 deaths according to Hamas themselves. Now, if you had dropped 200,000 bombs on a densely populated area with the goal of killing as many people as possible, the death toll should be much, much, much higher than 67,000. So you don't really need to be an expert in urban warfare. All you need to be able to do is calculus. Basic middle school calculus. That's all that's needed to disprove the claim of genocide.
I'll give you the cynical Israeli answer to this. You know, if you notice what we did in Lebanon with the beeper, that we managed within a few seconds to seriously damage or kill at least 3,000 Hezbollah operators by simply inserting something into their beeper. If we're that efficient, and also we destroyed all of Iran's nuclear facilities, bar one, within 12 days. So for that, if we're that efficient, if Israel was really intending to commit a genocide, we could have done the job within a week to 10 days.
I'm sure.
You know, and if we committed a genocide, it's taken us 2 years to do it, we must be the most inefficient army in the world.
Which you are not. And that is one of the things I pointed out. Unfortunately for you guys in Israel, Swedish television has already aired sort of an apologetic newsreel about the Hezbollah beeper operation, where they portray the Hezbollah operatives as innocent victims who were victims of an Israeli war crime. And the same goes for one of our biggest and most prestigious dailies, Dagens Nyheter. They have also taken Hezbollah side in this kerfuffle. So it doesn't really matter what you do. And I've been to Israel several times. I met you Israelis. You are a very efficient military force. Unfortunately, you really suck at PR.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And believe me, part of my battle has been with the Israeli government on this issue. But the last question really put me in mind of another question that I wanted to ask you. Have any of our released hostages or people who had been victims, survivor victims of, for instance, the Nova Festival or the massacres of the 7th of October, have they ever been invited by the Swedish government into Sweden to explain what happened over there, or in fact appeared on the media in Sweden?
Not that I've noticed, no.
What explains that absence, that vacuum, that bias? Because there have been several countries, including countries that are critical of us, like Britain, for instance.
Well, as I said, the Palestinianism in Sweden is so entrenched that if you were to try and correct the narrative, this would lead to enormous cognitive dissonance in the Swedish population. Because if what they have been told for decades by now is true, when it turns out it is a blatant lie, I think they would probably, well, not revolt, because Swedes are very timid, but it would lead to social unrest. So there will be no corrections. There will be nothing, because they would have to redo their entire system. They would have to reteach history to an entire population of 10 million people. And that's just not going to happen, because a lot of the people who have propagated these lies now for, almost half a century or more, then they are still alive and they are revered in Swedish public life. You'd have to change everything about Sweden, everything.
If I was to suggest through you also for maybe certain members of the Social Democrats that we arrange a visit to Sweden, to the Swedish Parliament, of some of the people who survived the 7th of October massacre, and certainly bring along some of the survivors who survived 2 years of being Hamas hostages underground and other places in Gaza, to give their view of what they experienced in the Swedish Parliament. Do you think this would happen? And perhaps I would assume that your Hamas supporting members of Parliament would absent themselves from that public event.
That's exactly what would happen. I was at a lecture not long ago, maybe 2 years ago, by a Swedish person of Egyptian Coptic origin, who has written probably the most extensive PhD thesis about the Muslim Brotherhood in Sweden and the EU that has been published so far. It's an excellent thesis. And he held a lecture in Swedish Parliament, and the lecture was completely full of right-wing politicians. There wasn't one person from the left who attended this lecture, not one. Oh. And the same thing would happen if you tried to invite survivors of being hostages of Hamas. You could get a right-wing party to invite them to Parliament and they can hold the lecture, but I think the left would excuse themselves.
One final question with regard to the media over there, which suddenly came to mind. We in Israel have been watching news reports for about a week now about the slaughter of Christians in Africa in various locations. Sudan, Nairobi, Nigeria, for instance. It's horrendous. The figures there dwarf any casualty figures in Gaza. But we know about it, we're concerned about it, and a government is trying to reach out to people who can do something against the Islamic forces that are both killing the Christians in Africa. And there's a late report from 2 days ago about 24 schoolgirls have been abducted from their school. And you can imagine what they're going through right now. I'm asking you this, whether this has been covered at all on Swedish television.
Swedish state media has been forced, because of independent voices like myself, to report some on it. So there has been some reporting, but they stay as far away from the religious dimension of the conflict as they possibly can. That means that they're not really pointing out the fact that these horrendous crimes are being perpetrated by Muslim forces and for Islamic reasons.
So you're telling me that actually the moral Christian voices, there is no voice of a mass moral Christian force to speak up against what's happening elsewhere, not just in Africa to Christians, but also what is happening, not necessarily directly to Christians, but what could happen to them with the rise of an imported alien culture. Are Christian Swedes not aware about this? Not actively against that?
They absolutely are aware of this. But I would divide the Christian population, the believing Christian. I mean, we are, according to every statistic, the most secular country in the world. But we have a Christian population. They are aware. The Swedish state church is, like every other agency, infiltrated and dominated by the left. So they try to tone it down and and not speak about it. But there are free churches in Sweden, and they speak about it and try to raise awareness about this issue. And there are also free and independent, well, not many, maybe one, Christian newspapers who also talk about this. But then there's another Christian newspaper who is dominated by leftists who try to tone it down. So this is the situation. And right before we had our conversation here, I was actually watching the Swedish church meeting that happens every year for the Swedish state church. And they had a motion to stop cooperation with Islamic Relief, which is a charity organization dominated by the Muslim Brotherhood. And the motion was put forward by Swedish Democrats, National Conservatives, and then it was dispelled by Social Democrats who went up and said, no, we're supposed to have a conversation and dialogue and cooperation with the Muslim Brotherhood because they are very good people, and this is just Islamophobia, basically.
So let's point to the future. Let's end up with this. Is there any hope in the future in your next election of Swedes actually waking up to what's happening in their country before they lose it, before you lose your country, and maybe shift somewhere to the right? Is there any hope of that?
I don't know what it would take, because by now the ethnic majority Swedes, their daughters have been raped, gang raped. It doesn't garner much of media attention. Their young boys have been robbed. We even have a special term, denigration robbing, where you get pissed in the mouth by the perpetrators. Their elders have been raped in care homes. We have explosions every week. We have 13-year-old child soldiers in the street. We have had terror attacks on Drottninggatan, our main thoroughfare in Stockholm, and that led to a demonstration at our big square called Sergels Torg, where everyone was gathered in love and support, not of the terror victims, but just love and support in general. And they also sang the song Moving On. So I don't see it. I mean, we have the Swedish Democrats. They are trying their best, and they are the second largest party. But for some reason, nothing happens. And if you compare it to, for instance, England has a Muslim population of 4%. Sweden has a Muslim population of 10 to 11%. In a country that has been much more dominated by social democracy than England has. So I don't really see it happening. And as I said, Sweden has been a garrison town for Islamist efforts to infiltrate not only Sweden, but the rest of Europe, with the avid help of our social democrats. So, no, I think we are, what I usually say, and pardon the language, fucked beyond all fuckignition.
Good heavens. I think from what you say, you need your own Swedish version of a Tommy Robinson.
We certainly do. We certainly do. But
Tommy Robinson was also, for him, trying to speak up against gang rapes from imported migrants against young Swedish girls, because he protested and brought out the mobs or the crowds on the street. He got arrested and put in prison several times. This is what the authorities do, who don't want the truth to come out and are covering up what's going on. But he persisted, and he was making videos. I have to tell you that very recently, he was here in Israel. He was there for 2 or 3 weeks, and he had a major event in Tel Aviv, and had the opportunity of meeting him with a small group of people in advance of his this event, in which I spoke to him personally. And before that, I was dubious, but I'm not dubious anymore. I have to tell you and the people who are watching us over here that at the main event, he had an audience of about 1,000. And I want to tell you, most of those 1,000 were up to the age of 35. They were also all people like me. And they treated him like a rock star because of what he was doing in Britain. And because he knew what was going on and he defied the authorities time and time again to highlight it. And before he came here, he had managed to arrange, because also I have to tell you, in Britain, in London, in Manchester, they have marches of thousands of people marching behind Palestinian flags and burning British flags. And he had an event before he came over here with about 1 million people, which he called a flag march, 1 million people. And the tide is turning because of people like him. Now, he is probably not going to get involved in politics, but I can tell you in the next election that Nigel Farage and his Reform Party, not the Conservatives, the Reform Party, will become the leading party in Britain. But it started not so much by Nigel Farage, but an outlier of somebody like Tommy Robinson. I think you need the same in Sweden.
We definitely do, but there's a lot of things we need in Sweden, and I don't see them on the horizon yet.
So
we're heading for ethnic strife.
Really, the only alternative, I said, is to find a leader, if not a Tommy Robinson, either a Nigel Farage or a Geert Wilders, who will, we hope over here in Israel, for the sake of Holland, the Netherlands, would actually turn the page in the Netherlands as well, which is suffering the same as Sweden. Because you have to stand firm and you have to bring out the rank and file Swedes. Because if you don't do that, they'll, like you said, like you've described here, they will go along with the herd silently. The problem in Sweden is your welfare state. If they need the government to give them all the benefits that they think they've paid for, then they're not going to argue against that government. That doesn't mean that the centre-right party is not going to give them the same benefits, but at least they would have addressed the rank issues that in Sweden that is dividing or destroying the country, surely.
Well, we have the Swedish Democrats, and they are the second largest party, but Sweden moves slowly, and I think too slowly. And as I said, with a 10 to 11% of the population of at least a Muslim cultural background, I have a hard time seeing it happening. You have to understand that according to statistics, not Swedish statistics, because we don't measure these things, but if you put together Pew statistics and EU statistics, in the age group of 15 to 29-year-olds, 15 to 29-year-olds in Sweden, 25 to 30% are from a Muslim background. And if you look at the age group 0 to 30, it's 40%. So that's the future of Sweden.
Horrendous. Listen, I hope people in your country, in Sweden, are listening to this, and I hope people will also rise up and start taking charge of your country before you leave it. But I'm sorry that we have to end this on a negative note, Aaron. Thank you so much for being my guest and being so explicit.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
Okay, well, we're not going to call it a pleasure, Aaron, but let's hope for some brighter news. This is Barry Shaw, The View from Israel.
אנו מכריזים בזאת